The first thing that he mentioned is that there's a way of reading the Bible, and that the video talked about, of reading 3 chapters from the Old Testament, 1 Psalm, and 1 chapter of the New Testament. And one of the reasons that they do it that way is so that way you don't get bogged down in the begats of the Old Testament, where it's begat, 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 and then you're just like, I'm giving up, and you put it away. And so you see here, it's broken down for you according to how and what you're going to read. And so that way you make your way slowly through Genesis and Exodus and these chapters of the Old Testament, while you're also making your way through the Gospels and the New Testament as well. And the Psalms are sort of nestled in between as these as the songs of prayer, the songs of praise. And you actually cycle through the Psalms twice, because the Psalms are the daily prayers of all the monasteries in the world. The Psalms are daily prayers, and so the Psalms you'll actually get to know quite well by reading through those 2 times through the reading. And so that's the way it's set up, so that way it's a less daunting process. And you guys all have Bibles next to you, and if you look through that, if you look at the very first reading, if you want to just scroll to the very first reading of Genesis 1 through 3, and Psalm 1 and Matthew 1, it's not that terribly daunting as far as how long that would take to read. It's it's a few pages depending on how big your Bible is, and Bibles vary in sizes. But you would read. Let's see, in my little Bible here I got for my first confirmation. It's 3 pages of the Old Testament, and then 1 page for the Psalm, and then going into the New Testament, I'm sure it'll be about a page for Matthew 1. 1 page for Matthew 1. So, and that's pretty typical for a small Bible like this. You can also have a much bigger Bible like this. This is my big study Bible, the New Oxford Annotated Bible. And we'll talk about the different types of Bibles that you can use. There's various types of Bibles floating around here. There is, could you hold up that black Bible that's right next to you? That's a New Revised Standard Bible that has some footnotes and annotations next to it, and those are really handy because those tell you some of the details of some of the literal things that are going on historically in the Bible, but in a less heavy way than this book does. This one is great as far as this is the Bible and this is the footnotes on every single page, where there's tons of footnotes going on, as there is in a book that's of this size as well, where it's Bible and footnotes where it's going on. And so it's deciding which Bible you want to read. They recommend either New Standard Revised, the King James Version, King James Bible, or the Jerusalem Bible as really good Bibles to use. But you can use whatever Bible you also feel most comfortable with. There's not a really wrong one to use. So that's talking about
Oxford Annotated is New Revised Standard.
Yeah, the Oxford Annotated is the New Oxford Annotated New Revised Standard Version. So this is an excellent one to use, and we'll talk. One of the reasons why this is excellent is for the historical understanding that it gives you of the historical context of the Bible, and we'll talk about that when we talk more about how to actually read the Bible.
If I could just make one point.
Yeah.
One thing not to do is to take a line of text and Google it, because you will get some pretty strange interpretations on that.
Yeah.
However, there are some online sources that are quite good.
Yes, and one thing that which I can't show you here, but one thing that will happen is the day that you start reading this, and actually you'll begin not actually on January 1st, you'd begin on January 4th, because that would be a Monday. And you would sign up on that Monday that you're starting the challenge, and you would get your very first email from the Center for Biblical Studies, and they would have, and they break down for you the historical background for Genesis 1 through 3. And for the Psalm and for Matthew. And so they give you really nice background information. So you don't even actually need to do that Googling work, or you don't need to have a big heavy Bible like this. They give you really nice information and background information and basically teaching information that you might need for that. Yeah. No, it's totally free. Yeah. Yep, it's entirely free. And when you sign up, the sign up sheet is up here that we'll do at the end of this.
It'll be on the podium here.
And when anybody who signs up, we'll send you the links for where to sign up for getting that daily newsletter and where to get this printout. This is 12 pages of printout, which is why we didn't print it out to give to you guys, because that's a lot of ink and paper for the church to do. But we are going to be printing this out in the daily, in the weekly tower, right?
Yeah, weekly tower, and also the readings for the following week will appear at 5 a.m. on Sunday morning in the call to prayer. So there are different ways. Sorry, I had to say.
Oh, that's fine. And so I think that's enough as far as like the nuts and bolts. What I want to talk about mostly, though, is this idea of the devotional style of reading. So I think we're good with your iPad for that, and we'll talk about more of what I have up on here and this idea of the devotional style of reading. Because when we're talking about the Bible challenge, we're not talking about reading the Bible so you can say, I read the Bible, I'm better than you. Or I'm going to read the Bible so I can win an argument against somebody else about the Bible. That's not the reason for reading the Bible or doing the Bible challenge. The reason for daily devotional reading is basically it's reading the Bible as prayer. And another term for that is Lectio Divina, which is prayerful reading, is devotional reading, or what they call sacred reading, the ancient art of, here's one book on it, there's many, many books on how to do Lectio Divina. Here's one by a monk called Sacred Reading, which is the translation for Lectio Divina, of how to go about the process of reading the Bible. And the way that we're going to go about doing this, by separating it out into these smaller chunks, is a form of Lectio Divina. And so that's what I want to sort of talk through with you guys today. Let me back this up a little bit so I can see it as well as you guys. Okay, so basically in Lectio Divina, the big thing with that is that, as Michael Casey says, that we open ourselves up to the Bible. That when we come to this Bible, we come to it defenseless and we come to it ready to be influenced. That we open ourselves to the text and we approach it in a spirit of faith and obedience, ready to perceive in it what we read the Word of God, the will of God, and the action of God coming to save us. We approach the reading as a disciple comes to the master, receptive, docile, willing to be changed. So that's a radically different way of reading than we approach probably a lot of other readings in our lives. And so it takes a different sort of approach that I have sort of outlined here. As a way of approaching it. It's in this continuous sort of reading of the scripture. So one of the first things that this type of reading requires is patience. It requires a slowing down of your intellectual metabolism. A lot of us in this room are very smart. We want to be really fast readers and say, I got this. I can read these 3 chapters or the 4 chapters in the Psalm in 10 minutes flat. that's not a good thing to be a speed reader for the Bible. We want to take our time and actually sit with the Bible and let it work upon us. And so taking that time, that patience, to allow it to do that work is important. We want to grasp. Basically, one of the things he says is wanting to grasp everything immediately is the best way to comprehend nothing. And I think those are good words to go by. So the next thing we want to remember is also keeping an open mind. A lot of us have preconceived notions about parts of the Bible that we think are bad, that we think are sort of useless parts of the Bible to read, that parts of the Old Testament are just boring, or that parts of the New Testament, and yes, some parts of the Old Testament are boring, and some parts of the New Testament we might think, we might think Paul was a misogynist, and we had, the wonderful talk that I wasn't here for, but I heard about, debunking that, and coming to parts of the Bible and saying, okay, even though I'm coming to this reading and I know it is just a genealogy, I'm going to still keep an open mind for it. Although, that said, they do recommend for the genealogies in the Old Testament, you can go ahead and skim those. You do not need to read the genealogy with a fine-tooth comb. It's a rare person that can find serious devotion within a genealogy. So skimming is fine when you are in the genealogies. But to keep an open mind when you're in a passage, when you're in a place, when you're in a book where you think, oh, I know what this is about, or I don't like this passage, or oh, I love this passage and I know what it's about, to keep an open mind to learn something new from it is one of the ways to approach it. The next two go together, which is finding both time and quiet in the way that you approach your reading. And these is essential. I would suggest for this approach of Lectio Divina, instead of having that, as part of having the patience of slowing down your intellectual metabolism, plan on spending a half an hour a day on reading the Bible, which isn't a huge time commitment, but it is a time commitment. And so it requires you to look at your schedule and say, okay, where can I make the time? Not where can I find the time, but where can you in your schedule say, this is where I'm carving out a half hour a day to spend with the Bible. And then you put that in your schedule and you do that. So you create that time when often, it'll be maybe first thing in the morning where you get up a little bit earlier and you create that time, or you watch a little bit less of the news in the evening, or before you go to bed. You find some chunk of a half an hour that you're going to spend with the Bible, reading it in this way, and plan on it being about a half an hour. That half an hour allows you to read it in this method that we're going to talk about in a few seconds. And you need quiet for doing this. For those of you guys that have kids, you need to get away from your kids while you're doing this. You need to find your own spot, and ideally a spot that feels somewhat sacred to you. You want to approach this with, skipping down to number 6, this process with reverence. This isn't just a normal book that you're reading. This is the Bible, and so and you're not reading this, as I said, just like a normal book. You're reading this devotionally, and so you want to find a space in your house that you make a sacred space for that half an hour time of reading. Then maybe you light a candle in a corner of your house that has a nice quiet chair that is separate from other places that you do your reading in. Having these sort of rituals of having a special place where you go to create this quiet, both a literal quiet in your house, but also a quiet of your interior mind and spirit, is really important of having this be a successful way of reading. And then to go back to number 5, to persevere. is the biggest thing, and that's what Lectio Divina comes to us from the monastics, and that's what the monastics are all about. And if you think that they don't want to quit sometimes, they do Lectio Divina every day, and sometimes they really don't want to, but they do. You continue reading even when you're like, oh, I really don't want to read the Bible this day. You still do it that day, and you have just that, well, I just have to read those 3 chapters of the Old Testament, that Psalm, and the New Testament, and maybe that day is not a great reading day for you, but you still do it. You persevere, and the next day will be a better reading day for you. That's one of the nice things of having it broken up in this way, is that when you hit a slump, you can still persevere through that slump, and it gets you back through to the other side, rather than saying, I don't feel like it today, I'll do it tomorrow. Because as soon as you do, I don't feel like it today, I'll do it tomorrow, then the next day it's I don't feel like it today either, I'll do it tomorrow, and then you start getting backlogged. So keeping the perseverance is key as far as keeping with this reading schedule, so you don't become overwhelmed. And one thing that you might have noticed when we had it up there on the screen is that every Sunday you have a break from your reading. There it just says on Sundays you just come to church and you enjoy hearing the readings here in church. So you have every Sunday you have off from doing your own reading, and you just enjoy the liturgy and the readings of church itself. So it's basically actually just reading 6 days a week. So that's the requirements and basically how to as far as reading. Next I want to talk about the actual process of what makes Lectio Divina a little bit different in the last 10 minutes of our time. But anybody have any questions or thoughts about this? All right, because I want to have actually hopefully a few minutes of time just to practice Lectio Divina. So Lectio Divina is broken up basically into these 4 parts, where when you read a section of the Bible, you read it for literal meaning, then for Christological meaning, behavioral meaning, and mystical meaning. And you read it sort of in that order, but also recursively, where they feed back into themselves. So literally, you need to make sure that you're understanding the Bible in as basically as strong of a literal sense as you can. And so there are areas of the Bible that are tricky, where we don't quite understand if you don't understand the historical context, you can get pissed off. You can say, what the heck are they talking about in here? And that's where having the footnotes are useful, or having that daily email from the Center for Bible Studies becomes very useful, because they will clarify for you, this is the historical context. Because the Bible is an anthology of so many different authors and so many different types of readings that are gathered from over 1,000 years of writing. So it's 1,000 years of writers writing in a multitude of different languages, all gathered together in one book. So it's a tough read, and so there's many scholars who've done the work for us as far as giving us the historical, literal sense of the Bible. And so having a little bit of that grounding helps you understand the Bible a little bit better. And so having that helps you just understand what you've read. And so that's important, but that's also sort of the least important for devotional. It's both the most and the least important. It's the foundation where you start from, but then it's just where you start from to get to the next 3 places, which are where you really want to get to for devotional reading. So Christological reading. Does anybody know what Christological reading is? Has anybody heard of that? What's that?
Logical means study.
Yeah, so logical means study, and so it's a study of Christ. And so it's the study of Christ within the whole Bible. So it's not just the study of Christ within the New Testament, it's the study of Christ also within the Old Testament. It's the approach of the Bible with the idea that this entire book is giving us knowledge of Christ. And so when you're reading when you're reading Genesis, when you're reading the very first the creation story in Genesis, what does the creation story tell you about Jesus? How metaphorically can you read that and get and learn something about Christ, about your relationship with Christ as a Christian? And you take that approach to all of your readings, and whether it's the Old Testament or the New Testament. So it's a different approach and so it's not saying that the Old Testament writers wrote the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, with any idea of it being about Christ, but it's you taking your understanding as a Christian and looking at the Old Testament and finding Christian meaning in these often otherwise arid passages. So Genesis is sort of a bad example, because that's rather rich and very beautiful passages of reading. But there's other passages in the Old Testament that can be rather dry. But if you look at them with an idea of what does this tell us about Christ? What does this tell us about being Christian? They can suddenly bloom and show great and just really flower for us. And that's basically what they do in our sermons every Sunday, where you'll notice that often the sermon is based on the gospel, but sometimes they'll make the entire sermon come from the Old Testament, and it'll be a Christian-based a sermon about Christ. But it's a sermon based off of the Old Testament. The behavioral sense is, how is God shaping our morals and values? And then the mystical sense is the power of the Bible to move us. How to make this, basically the Bible, making reading the Bible becoming this act of prayer, where we are talking to the Bible and the Bible's talking back to us, where it's becoming this very personal act of devotion. One of the things that people worry about, well, I don't know if I'm doing it right. And Michael Casey says that you can be sure that your understanding of the Bible, if it's producing love in us or love in you, and the fruits of the Spirit. So if as you're reading the Bible, you are finding that you're falling in love with some of the language of the Bible, that you're falling in love with a story that is moving you at all, then you're experiencing, you're reading it correctly. You're experiencing Lectio Divina. So basically, the read for Lectio Divina, what you'll do is that you'll read all the chapters. You'd read the 3 chapters, the Psalm, and the 1 chapter in the New Testament. And so you'd read that through, and you'd think about it and say, okay, what was it that I just read? And you don't speed read through that. You read through it normally and think about it and make sure you understand it in the literal sense. And so you sort of check off that. And once that is done, after that is done, then you think about, well, what passage, what part of those chapters did I like the most? What really spoke to me? And so it might be that there was a part, or what really confounded me. What part of the Old Testament was just really itching at me, that I want to go back and look at again, that really is bothering me? Or what was the Psalm? Was the Psalm really disturbing in some way that I don't understand, that I really want to read? Or was there some passage in the New Testament that really moved me, that I want to read again? And so whatever section it is that really caught you, and within all of those chapters in the Psalm, there will be some part that'll reach out to you and ask you to read it again. You'll go back and you'll read just that passage, not necessarily the whole chapter, just that passage within that chapter, and you'll read it a second time. And when you're reading it the second time is when you'll read it more for that Christological sense and that behavioral sense. And so with that, what I recommend doing, and what they recommend doing in Lectio Divina, is you read it and you start looking for words and passages that pop out for you, that what is rising to the surface? What words are really speaking to you, and coming to the surface, and why? Why is it these words? Why is it this passage? Why? And you just start having this dialogue with it. You ask the questions, how do these words relate to Christ? Or how do these words that are rising to the surface, how do these words relate to morality and behavior in this realm? And so you start thinking about it in that way, as far as reading in the Christological and behavioral sense. And then you'd probably want to read it a third time, because again, you're just talking about a little passage there. And as you read it in this third time, you still might be dwelling in these above senses of the behavioral and the Christological sense, but also consider why is this speaking to you specifically? Because it's speaking to you as individually, not to somebody else. These words are jumping out to you, and so why is it speaking to you? Why is it bothering you, or why are you loving this passage? And so you dwell in it. You open yourself up to the text, and you allow yourself to be transformed by it. It's that open-mindedness. It's that allowing yourself to be open and moved by the Bible. And that's the practice of true Lectio Divina that you're doing in that passage, of this sort of recursive prayer that you're doing with that passage. And some days it might just stop on purely the Christological or behavioral sense, and other days you might have a truly meaning moment of prayer where you'll feel God's presence with you in the Bible, speaking to you in that devotional sense of reading the Bible. So we have 5 minutes. So in the 5 minutes, I want us to quickly practice that with today's reading, which is from Luke. And so you all have a Bible next to you, and I just want you to look up Luke 3. And it's going to be Luke 3, 7 to 18, which is today's gospel. And one thing that you'll want to do for this type of reading is a prayer in itself. So by signing up for the Bible Challenge, you're signing up for basically doing a half an hour of prayer a day. So reading the Bible this way is a prayer in itself, but it's also nice to insert prayer into this, to start reading the Bible with a prayer, and to the end with a prayer. And you can use a prayer from like the Book of Common Prayer, like there's a prayer on education that you can use, or you can just start with a prayer as simple as I'll start us off with a prayer in a second, and often ending with like something like the Lord's Prayer can be good. But from the Book of Common Prayer, there's the Collect 23 is for education, can be a good one to start with. But I'll start us off with a prayer for this, that Lord God, please help us as we read the gospel, to help us understand the gospel in a deeper way, to help us find words and passages that speak to each one of us individually in the way that help best move our hearts and our souls. Amen. So, beginning with that, who would like to go ahead and read us the gospel, so we can all just hear it together and read through there? Anybody want to volunteer to read it? Okay, go for it.
In the 15th year of the reign of Emperor Tiberius.
I think it's Luke 3, 7 through 18.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
John said
Yep.
to the crowds that came out to be baptized by him, "You brood of vipers, who warned you to flee from the wrath to come? Bear fruits worthy of repentance. Do not begin to say to yourselves, 'We have Abraham as our ancestor.' For I tell you, God is able from these stones to raise up children to Abraham. Even now the axe is lying at the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, does not bear good fruit, is cut down and thrown into the fire." And I go through 14.
Actually, for sake of time, let's stop with that.
Okay.
So everybody now just take a moment and reread to themselves just that one little piece, one little passage. Okay, so is any words, anything bubbling up for anybody that you guys noticed? Yeah, Michael.
The sense of entitlement inherent in people who's preaching that God is preaching to.
Okay, so entitlement, and that excellent. All right, what else? Yeah, Vicki.
It strikes me that he's saying don't run from punishment, but change yourself so that there isn't a wrath. Be somebody that is worthy of praise as opposed to punishment.
Excellent. All right, and so both of these you guys are both talking already on the behavioral level as far as don't run from punishment, but change yourself. Anything else that you guys are seeing in this passage? Anybody just have any words that you found were beautiful or that spoke to you? Yeah, in the back.
Brood of vipers.
Brood of vipers. Yes, that's a beautiful image, a scary image. And just having the image brood of vipers can be something that you just might want to meditate on. Sometimes it's something just like that. What does a brood of vipers mean? And why is that image here in this passage? And spending time dwelling on that can be what you spend your devotional time on. Yeah.
Well, it says crowds of people came, and in another, like in Matthew or one of the other books, it says he says this to like the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but here he's actually saying it to everybody. And so that was like, oh wait, that's to me too. That's not only to those people that, Scripture has sort of singled out as to be sort of self-righteous.
Excellent. And that's one of the things, that's one of the benefits too. By the time you read this, you'll have read Matthew and Mark. You'll read through these where you'll have that knowledge of like, oh, this is the crowds. We're part of the crowds. And so having that knowledge of having read the Bible through, you'll have that deeper knowledge. I think I saw one more hand up. Was there another word that spoke to somebody?
Well, I just think the whole idea of punishment is very alive and well in this.
Right. Which is something we can be uncomfortable with, especially as Episcopals. We're not that big on punishment. We're a loving church. We're not a God and wrath and punishment sort of church. We want to love people, and so that's something to think on and dwell on, is to think about what do we really feel about punishment, and does it make us uncomfortable, and why? And so to spend that 15 minutes of devotional time in your reading, really thinking about punishment and what it's making you feel can be a really moving time to hear what God is basically telling and speaking to you directly about punishment. Can be really powerful. Okay, we are out of time. So any questions about this? One of the things, so the big way that we want people to read this is the 3, 1, and 1. So 3 chapters of the Old Testament, 1 Psalm, and 1 in the New Testament. But you don't have to read it that way. You can sign up for doing the Bible Challenge and just know I'm going to do 1 chapter of the New Testament every day. And that's what I want to do. I just want to do the New Testament. And that's totally fine. You can still sign up on this sheet and do that. And you can sign up on the sheet and have no idea if you're going to be able to make it, but still sign up and have the intention, and because you also still want to get the support that we'll be giving. And so if you're at all interested in giving this a try, sign up. is basically what I'm saying. Don't not sign up because you're not positive you want to do it. Sign up if you want to just at least give it a try and come forward and do that. One thing we're going to be offering in the beginning of January for the first 3 months of this, which is the toughest 3 months, because you're making it through the toughest part of the Old Testament, is that we'll be doing weekly classes, I think on Monday nights, that are optional, that you can drop in, you can come to the classes, and we'll talk through what the readings we've done that week and answer questions that people have and talk through what we've been doing. So they're sort of both social and educational classes on a weekly basis for the first three months. And then after that, we'll probably meet more on like a monthly basis.